Today on the Communicators, a discussion on the expectations of the information technology industry over technology proposals of President-elect Barack Obama. Our guest is Phil Bond with the Information Technology Association of America.
And aside from his current position at ITAA, our guest was also served in government as the Undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Commerce for Technology. Phil Bond, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And joining us in the questioning is Jill Aitoro with NextGov.com. She serves as their senior reporter. It's a website that deals with government issues and technology. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Bond, a new administration is about to take place under President-elect Obama. What does that mean for the IT world?
I think the IT sector is really excited. Two reasons. One, we saw unprecedented deployment and use of IT in this campaign by this candidate. I mean, really turned the page in terms of history of the use of IT in a political setting. So a lot of excitement about what does that mean when you translate that now to governing. That same team with that same mindset, what does it mean for government? So a lot of excitement there. I think the other excitement comes from the fact that he has taken great pains, I think, in his campaign to show this reasoned, listening approach. He's spelled out a very detailed tech plan, but also very reasoned and listening. And I think those are the two things the tech sector wants. They want somebody who gets technology and how it can transform, and they want to be listened to on the issues. So a lot of excitement about the potential and the possibilities.
Because technology falls into so many areas, generally, where does President-elect Obama fall specifically in your industry? And what kind of issues does he bring to that?
Right. I think he brings a set of them. We did an assessment through our trade association of the two candidates. Both scored pretty well, but in different areas. He's made a bit of a name for himself in the Senate on e-health, and obviously very concerned both about the privacy of health records, but also the deployment of health records to save a lot of money, make healthcare more efficient. He's spoken out about cybersecurity, which is absolutely imperative. If everybody's going to be on the net and plugged in and getting information, they have to feel secure about that. We were thrilled to see that because that's a big deal. And then, of course, broadband deployment and the Web 2.0 technologies that he displayed so well during the campaign. So I think there's a lot of excitement there and an openness to the idea of bringing the very best of the private sector in to help with the public sector's mission. That's what we can do.
Jill Aitoro.
You mentioned actually communication, or you alluded to communication with the citizens and giving the citizens a voice with government. I know President-elect Obama has spoken quite a bit about transparency and this word transparency. What does it mean? But you mentioned Web 2.0 technology. He's talked quite a bit about enabling dialogue with the citizens through the internet, through chats online, and a view into various legislation before it even passes into law. Is this feasible? You know, my question is this really going to happen? And funding-wise, as well as security and everything else. What are the challenges?
Well, I think there are some challenges. One you mentioned certainly is security, because with all the connectivity and different devices and so forth, you've got to make sure that every aspect of that network is safe and secure. But I think the possibility and the upside is significant too. And I think they've shown in their campaign that they can do it, that they've thought about it. So the idea of commenting on legislation or pushing out messages to a more informed electorate, you want to be as transparent as you can, but also respect both the privacy and the proprietary nature of some of the communication that is going on there. Again, I hearken back to the campaign where we saw this. So in the government space, you can see comments on legislation or asking for support on legislation, and then that going virally from those people to their friends. That's all pretty exciting. I think that much like in healthcare, where we saw this balanced approach about we want to use them, but we also want to protect privacy. I think we'll see the same thing in this space, because one of the concerns for the private sector when they engage with government is to make sure that their proprietary information doesn't get blasted out to 20 million people when they're trying to also compete as a business. So I think this reasoned, balanced approach of embrace the technology, but let's respect privacy and proprietary information for companies, that's a big potential win and a transformative event.
And you mentioned cybersecurity, of course. A lot of these Web 2.0 technologies, which of course encourage collaboration over the internet, bring in sensitivity of cybersecurity issues and the ability to hack into some of these communications and access computer networks. Is he up to speed on what needs to be done there? And we have on the plate right now with the current administration this huge cybersecurity initiative, a national cybersecurity initiative. Is he in tune with the plans there? What does he need to do to forward those along with his own agenda?
We were very encouraged, and I remember companies very encouraged in the kind of the second phase of the campaign, if you will, really after the two-party conventions. He began to speak out more about this, and in the context of national security, as well as just the security for individuals communicating for one another, which we think is terrifically important. The government networks have to be protected. So he clearly gets that and has been communicating that. He's surrounded by some fantastic people who really understand technology, and so it's no surprise. John Thompson, the chairman and CEO of Symantec, a close friend and big supporter of the president-elect. So, perhaps not too surprising that we saw cybersecurity mentioned like that, but that's important. So you can kind of check that box. They get that. They understand that. They're going to apply that in the new administration.
Sure. One of the aspects of the new administration, at least one of the things he wants to do, is employ a chief technology officer. What, in your opinion, who is the right person for that job as far as skills and requirements are concerned? And then what's the right, job description? Because it encompasses a lot of different things you have to do at once.
Well, it does, and there's a lot of buzz about that. People trying to predict who it might be, celebrity CEO names being tossed around, some very qualified people with a bit more of a policy background in and outside the campaign have also been mentioned. So, and a little bit on what the job would be. I think to some people it sounds like it's just a CIO, but I think that's wrong. A very savvy group of people in this campaign called it a CTO. In a corporate setting, that's more than just being the CIO. That's really looking at all of technology and trends and what's coming down the pike and figuring out how does that apply to my mission, whether it's a business or a government. So I think a CTO who sits at the table to say, yes, I can comment on architecture of the government systems, but also how can technology help in transportation, healthcare, of course, we know a lot about, but in every mission, national security, you name it, how can a technology perspective be brought to bear on that? So I think you need a person who really understands technology broadly defined, but they also, to be effective in this setting, in this town, you have to understand how government and the bureaucracy works. You have to understand how policy is made. So that, to me, kind of takes it out of the celebrity CEO standing. Certainly people like Julius Janikowski and Larry Strickling on the campaign would be that kind of person. I think an interesting name that's been thrown out there, Bill Joy from Sun Microsystems, who really is more of a scientist end of things, and now in the venture capital world. So I think that would be a fascinating idea as well. So I look for that bigger idea, that bigger definition, somebody who's going to bring a technology perspective, but who has somewhere in their background an understanding of how this town works.
So not pure Silicon Valley, not pure Washington insider.
Right.
It's interesting. You mentioned a seat at the table, and I mean, one thing we've covered quite a bit is the role of the CIO in the agency and whether or not they have the authority to really set IT policy within their agency, and that includes control over the budget. Do you expect the role of the CIO will change, and is it just a matter of the role of the CIO changing because the CTO now has the ear of the administration? I mean, how is that going to? How is the government going to change?
I think the role of the CIO has been evolving for a number of years now, getting more attention on the Hill, and certainly with measuring some of the information and security practices of the government, getting greater attention and being scored by OMB and so forth. So I think that's been evolving anyway. I would sum it up this way. We're in the information age, and government is in the information business. So it is not surprising that the chief information officer or the chief information security officer should have a bigger role. The reason they have a bigger role is because it's now all based on technology. So a chief technology officer really needs to be at the table.
Well, and it's so funny because so often the CIO, we found, doesn't have the ear even of the secretary in their particular agency. Often they're reporting to the CFO, which just screams this is a money issue and how can we cut costs. And I mean, it seems that that's a challenging approach when you try to implement IT strategically within an agency. So, whether or not that'll shuffle out.
Well, I think that is an ongoing challenge because the way we're geared to think here in Washington is about budgets and money and so forth, and maybe not necessarily about the way that information and the architecture can spread across, be shared, and it's just a little bit different mindset. Again, I sound like a broken record here, but they have displayed so clearly that they understand that in the way they operate their campaign. Again, it'll be exciting to see how that applies to government.
If one of the goals of this person is to help agencies work together and be more transparent, which the president-elect wants, from being in government, I know you probably know firsthand that sometimes agencies are not quick to open up their access. So this person has to step in and accomplish those goals. How does he relate with persons that currently serve in your position, perhaps, or will serve in your position, to make sure that happens?
Well,
he or she.
Yeah, he or she should listen to the private sector and the best minds in the private sector, because things move so fast that even the CIOs at Fortune 500 IT companies have a struggle to stay abreast of how quick things are changing. So one is listen to the private sector. But the other harkens back to what I said before. You have to understand how this town works. So yes, you can go talk to the agencies all you want, but you know what? They're funded by 13 different appropriation bills. So you got to get to Capitol Hill and talk to some folks too. So you have to understand how the town works. Get up and talk to the Hill, listen to the private sector, work the agencies, invoke the authority you have through OMB to bring some discipline there. That's how you get things done in this town. It's a multi-level chess game. And
how much, I mean, the impact of Congress and who now is in Congress and who has control of Congress, is that going to have a big impact?
Well, you presume that it would right now. Of course, we've got some chairs changing right now with some of the changes up there and the changes in ratios, because now the Democrats have a bigger majority. The Democrats have a bigger majority. They should be able to move things a little bit more easily. This president-elect has unprecedented goodwill. You add those together and you think maybe coming out of this first year, we'd actually get the appropriation bills passed and get the government funded, because it's really been government by continuing resolution for too long.
You had mentioned the current, some would say battle, some would say back and forth between chairmanships, both going on in the House and the Senate. What does the end result mean for firms like yours? And who would you like to see ideally in those spots?
Well, I don't know if I want to play that game in terms of, because one, the target's moving too fast, and secondly, we think we can work with just about anybody who's up there, because we think the facts are on our side. But this relates to something else I'd like to talk about, which is the tech sector has been famously fragmented and really done a poor job of telling its story to Capitol Hill. There's been an alphabet soup, there is today, of 10 to 15 different groups saying we're the voice of IT. So we've been busy consolidating some of those. We've done 2 mergers in the midst of another, really to try to consolidate that and say on the big issues, there's going to be one group that really speaks. And so, let us bring in the key players from the industry and give you our perspective. Because we believe that if they're informed, that 9 times out of 10 policymakers are going to come down in the right place. But we haven't done a very good job of informing them.
Well, and you bring up industry, or the industry side of things. What role do the IT contractors play in making a lot of these changes? A lot of people have said, whether or not it will end up shaking out this way, that Obama could end up cutting industry a little bit out of a lot of the IT spending that's happening in government, that he'll bring a lot more of these projects inside and have government really kind of take control as opposed to contracting them out to the private sector. Is that the right way to go, or do you feel he's even going to go there?
I don't really think he's going to go there. I think this is part of that practical listening, president-elect. The facts of the matter are that the government right now just doesn't have the talent and the people that it needs, where there's great agreement between advocates for government employees on Capitol Hill and from the contractor community, is that the professional folks who sit in the middle there overseeing these larger and increasingly more technical contracts, that cadre is shrinking and about to exit through retirement. So we need a professional core there. That would really help government, because we've done surveys of the American people on this. They overwhelmingly want the best private sector technologies, the Googles, the Microsofts, the IBMs, the Intels. They want them to help government perform their mission. But that means you really need a professional in the middle who knows how to write these big contracts in a way that works. It probably means an informed CTO and a really active CIO council to say, we're going to coordinate these and make them work together so that we can get to the transparency and some of the 2.0, but also the security that DOD and DHS need, and how do we make all that work together. So that's what's before us. I think it is eminently doable, a combination of goodwill, a smart tech-savvy administration, and then hopefully we do a better job of telling our story.
When you talk dollars, this ultimately leads to how the government approaches research and development grants, especially for specific technology projects. What do you imagine this president will undertake as far as that topic is concerned?
Well, I think you're going to see a real emphasis on basic R&D and increasing that where they can. Great consensus that is the role of government. and that as you get closer and closer to market, it's much more the private sector, whether it's angel investors, venture capitalists, and so forth. So I think we'll see that, first of all, and he's talked a lot about that in the campaign. Then I think also that you're going to see some of the themes he talked about. For instance, we need more research on cybersecurity. How can the government do basic research in that space to enable the private sector companies so that we can stay ahead of the hackers out there, sometimes sponsored by other governments who we know are trying to get into our government networks?
Specifically, what would you like to see as far as dollars are concerned, and compare that to what the Bush administration has done on this topic?
Well, I think when you consider all of the financial pressures that we're going to be in now in these unprecedented economic times, that if we can see, as we project we will, for the IT spend of the federal government to roll along pretty much status quo because of increased productivity and the leaps of technology, that should buy more. The Web 2.0 technologies are notoriously inexpensive relative to the impact they bring. So if we can keep that spend relatively even, that in this environment that would be really good, and we'll get more out of it.
How much dollars are we spending now?
We're around $70 billion and upwards per year by the federal government in IT spending.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, that said, it's remained pretty flat.
Yes. But I think when you look at the conditions today that the president-elect walks into, that would be really good, and those dollars do buy more each time. Especially if you have a well-written contract there in the middle, you can do a lot more. Where the taxpayer and the contractor and everybody gets disserved is when the contract isn't written right, the program fails, a lot of money's been spent, and everybody's pointing fingers or holding hearings on Capitol Hill. That just misses the point and wastes a lot of money. So if we can get a good contract written, we'll do more with that money.
Absolutely.
Do you, as far as your industry is concerned, do you have any ties to lobbying the FCC? And does it deal with communications? And what does a new FCC chairman or chairwoman bring to this equation?
Well, based on some of the names that are bounced around, they're going to bring a lot of experience because they've talked about some people with really great background who've done some service at the FCC in the past. They will bring the ability to hopefully unleash better use of spectrum so we get more wireless broadband capabilities, an opportunity to maintain internet connection as an information service, not a telecom service, which is more heavily regulated. So there will be plenty of opportunities, and of course, I'm sure there will be a debate about how you connect different devices to different networks and
like we saw at the white spaces debate.
And so forth. Absolutely, a decision we hailed. We think that's a very good thing. We obviously want to protect against interfering with other things like the microphones that we're wearing, but if you can free up that for broadband, wireless, that's what the country needs when we start to get into rural spaces. Congress passed a broadband mapping bill. So we're now going to have better data on where broadband isn't. Then we can look at private-public partnerships to reach those places, bundle some of the equipment that's needed, maybe use refurbished equipment in other cases, get people connected. Because going forward, you have to have those 21st century basic skills. You have to know your way around the internet in order to get jobs. I want to just spot one other thing real quickly. We did some research to show that, or to study the question, which showed that rural America increasingly, if they're connected, they can compete with India and anywhere else in the world for outsourced services. So you get connectivity to rural America and get them tech savvy. We can really bring jobs because companies can outsource or near shore, as they call it, to folks here in rural America instead of necessarily sending the jobs overseas.
That brings up an interesting question because extending connectivity to the rural communities is an expense for some companies, or that's how they certainly view it. Right. Obama has spoken quite a bit about enabling access to everyone, but there's always been the problem of getting the equipment. When you have a bigger community of users, it's the price comes down. In the rural communities, low-income communities, it's more difficult to provide that access. I believe you and I have spoken before about the Universal Service Fund, and how that basically attempts to provide telecom services to those communities. Right. But is it updated? Does it need to better include some of the
This is a big idea that the Obama campaign talked about, is to repurpose the Universal Service Fund away from the old voice system to broadband. So it's universal service of broadband. A whole thicket of regulatory issues around that we don't have time and I don't have the expertise to get into. But it's a big idea, thinking of using that fund for universal service for broadband so you can get out some of the cost factors in that. And we think that that's a phenomenal big idea. And again, there will be a lot of a lot of specifics and kind of down in the weeds issues and the details there. But that's an interesting idea. I think there are other ways there. You can do some things in scoring of public housing to ensure that when public housing is built, it's wired and ready to go. That's something that hasn't happened yet. A few states have begun to explore that. So we can look at transportation. What can we do when we know that a project is being opened up? Why can't we use a Web 2.0 technology to alert every ISP interested in that market that, by the way, we're going to be digging earth here, and if you want to put down fiber right now is the time to do it. Instead, we tend to have multiple truck rolls and keep reopening the streets. I think we lived with that here in Washington, D.C. a little bit.
Isn't there a question, though, to make it financially viable for the companies involved? Because they put in the initial investment, they depend on subscribers, and sometimes, as we've seen, say in the case of wireless in cities that haven't gone that far, you have to make it financially viable for the companies.
Absolutely, you do. Some of the experiments to have government-owned networks have not gone well. So you want a private sector provider to do that, and you want to make it as efficient as possible. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is you do use the information government has to make it easier and more efficient for the private sector to provide it. So if I'm going to be opening up a road, I want ISPs to know. But also you want to look at some kind of accelerated depreciation rules, I think, in those areas which have been identified by the broadband map as underserved. Then okay, let's have some kind of quicker write-off for the costly equipment that has to go into place there. Let's make it easier to reach the underserved. I think those are the kinds of things we're going to be looking at.
Another issue you brought up, I believe a question ago, workforce and offshoring, and this is a big issue. Immigration is a big issue. What comes into play with that is the H-1B visas, which of course enable foreigners to come and take some of these, work in some of these IT positions. There's two thoughts there. One is, are they taking jobs away from Americans? And then the other side is, we just don't have the skills here, and we need to fill those skills. Obama has some interesting policies in that front. What direction do you think he'll go in, and where should he go?
From all that we've seen and heard, we hear a very balanced approach that, frankly, most of our companies, if not all, would agree with. And that is, one, yes, he voted for increasing the caps on the H-1B visas, but joined that with the issue of education and workforce. And so we believe very firmly that we have to do both. Yes, you can bring somebody over if you comply with the law, and the law says you must have tried to find somebody domestically and couldn't. So let's enforce that law. But if you can't, then yes, you should be able to bring the best and the brightest here. In fact, probably encourage them to stay because they'll add value and jobs to our economy rather than going home and adding jobs and values to their economy. That means also stapling a green card for advanced degrees. If we probably subsidize that education, let's keep them here, encourage them to create jobs here. But it also means K through 12 and secondary education, and really getting after that, encouraging kids to pursue degrees that are relevant to higher tech, higher value jobs. It means wiring in rural America so they can compete for those jobs. I am excited when I think about what this particular president with his communication skills could do with the bully pulpit to encourage kids to pursue those kind of degrees. We know from surveys that parents, guidance counselors, and even the kids themselves now think there are really no jobs in the tech field because they've seen the headlines about jobs going overseas. In fact, about a year ago, we hit a 5-year high in IT employment. Projections I was reading today say that IT employment will drop less than others in this downturn. So we need to get that message out that there really are jobs, and in fact, you need those skills for any job in the 21st century going forward, the basic technical understandings. What could this president do with the bully pulpit to move a generation? In fact, I brought a line in one of his great speeches. He challenged this generation to be the one that reshapes the economy to compete in the digital age. And that language understands that in a digital age, work can be done in other places. So we need to reshape our economy to compete with that reality. And I look forward to his use of the bully pulpit.
What's the first step on doing that?
Well, there are a number. That's why his tech plan, I think, was multifaceted.
But from your perspective, what would be the first step?
Well, from my perspective, in the current circumstance, I would say let's look at some things in a real stimulus bill that are going to help with that. So I think tax credits for underserved areas and for for the investments that need to be made, I think is a big one. I think we also ought to look at reducing the tax rate that corporations pay when they repatriate profits from overseas. So U.S. multinationals right now pay a 35% tax rate if they're going to bring some of their overseas profits home. We've tried this before. We lowered it temporarily. It caused hundreds of billions of dollars to come home. So in a liquidity crisis, companies that are using the credit markets, if they could suddenly bring billions home, I think that would be a good thing. That would be a good start. The first 100 days, that'd be all right.
Well, you mentioned it's the digital age and encouraging that. It's also the global age, which we talked about a bit. And offshoring, again, a lot of that ends up being the support, the maintenance and management of some of these IT networks and systems. Then you bring in issues of a lot of this going over and even manufacturing happening in China and issues of security that involve that. How do we get control of that as globalization becomes key in the market?
Well, manufacturing, of course, has been globalized for such a long time that I think security interests are kind of catching up to that and trying to look at that a little bit to see where and when that is a legitimate concern. The countries, China in particular, has now a very vested interest in trying not to mess that market up there. The China brand has already been marked up pretty badly. So it would not behoove them to manufacture anything that had bugs or anything in it. But I think you do have to look at that. I think that in a global economy, too, you need to be able to have a local electorate that feels like they have the tools and capabilities to compete in that. They appreciate it, I think, Americans appreciate, according to at least polling, the fact that they can go to a store and get a lower priced product due to globalization of some of the work, but they want to know that they're not going to be unemployed in that future. And I think while studies show a lot of the offshoring of the work and doing it more efficiently has net benefits for the economy, it doesn't always have net benefits for every family. And so that it takes us right back to education, takes us back to rural broadband, it takes us back to connectivity, so that this trend of rural sourcing for work could perhaps take off. There are a number of companies now in the U.S. who have deployed this famously in rural settings. We had a case here in Southwest Virginia where the government outsourced a lot of its work to companies in Southwest Virginia, and an area that wasn't thought of as being a tech center is today a tech center. Virginia Tech is a partner in that and so forth. And so we know it can work. We see the governor in Maine trying to do a similar thing to react to base closure by saying, you know what, I'm going to get broadband in here. I'm going to make this a source center for people to do work in the U.S. where there's less of a security concern than sending the work somewhere else where they may have heightened concerns. So I think there are ways to make this really work for everybody. We have to have smart policies, and we have to be able to communicate that. So we have a communicator-in-chief.
Can I turn to the current commander-in-chief who you served under?
Yes.
What would you say would be his legacy in the world of technology?
I think his basic policy, which sometimes has been depicted as no policy, has been to primarily rely on markets. And I think when you look at the increase in availability of broadband, that those numbers are pretty good, but there hasn't been as much aggressiveness as some, especially in the Democrat Party, would like to see programs more aggressive to actually push that out there. So I think there's been some reliance on that. I think the effort to move to white spaces that the FCC did recently, I think, will be long remembered as a positive move in that direction. So I think there has been a policy. It's been very reliant on market forces, and that has not been enough for some people who see the trends going on around the world, the U.S. slipping in some of the rankings and saying government maybe needs to get a little more active here.
We have time for one more question.
Well, mentioning the Bush administration, he's kind of come under fire in part from the Obama incoming administration for not being open enough with his records, preserving, I mean, there's the big issue right now in the White House that all sorts of emails have disappeared, essentially, and they're having trouble tracking them down for preservation and access from the public. Is it a matter Obama's going to have this challenge of living up to the promises of this visibility for the public in terms of his own records, government, and processes and so forth? Is it realistic, or do you have to find a happy medium between the Bush administration and what Obama is promising in terms of security, confidentiality, and so forth?
Well, I think on any policy question, at the end of the day, it comes down to really having a thoughtful balance about it. It is almost never all or none. And I think that reasoned approach has been kind of very much on show by the president-elect and his campaign team. So I expect that we are going to see more openness in many government processes, both for just the benefit of sharing the information, but also, importantly, for getting the input from citizens. There's a recognition, I think, by this team that innovation and imagination isn't just the bright people in Washington, but comes from outside this network. So I think information will flow both ways. And I think there will be some things you have to balance against that. You do have to balance the separation of powers and other kinds of issues that I think got this administration in a lot of hot water. And I think that the next administration will have to guard some of those prerogatives as well, perhaps with a little bit different emphasis.
Our guest this week is Phil Bond with the Information Technology Association of America, serves as their president and CEO. Also joining us, Jill Aitoro of NextGov.com. She's their senior reporter. And to both of you, thanks for being on the Communicators.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.